On a Boeing 767 bound for Cairo, Egypt Air's Flight 990 appears to be cruising smoothly over the Atlantic. The relief first officer Gamil El Batouti is alone in the cockpit, while the captain has gone to the washroom. But then the plane dips, plunging down. The nose pitches down, creating zero-G, weightlessness, throughout the aircraft.
As you push the nose down, as if you would be cresting the top of a hill in a car at a high speed that drops away, you'd feel the airplane fall away from you, and you would start to feel a little light in the seat, and as the dive progressed, you would feel a little bit lighter yet.
I rely on God.
Whatever the first officer is intending, he says nothing except this phrase again and again. Captain El Habashi fights the disorientation of zero gravity, desperately trying to return to the cockpit. Warning signals indicate the dive is exceeding the maximum speed allowed for the plane, taking them to 99% of the speed of sound. This far past the plane's design limits, the stresses on the airframe are pulling it apart.
What's happening?
Captain El Habashi pulls back hard on his control column. Then he tries to use the engines to power their way out of the dive by pushing forward on the throttles, but he gets nothing.
What? Who shut off the engines?
Desperate, the captain deploys the speed brakes, panels standing up from the wings, in an effort to slow the dive. The dive is slowing, back from the brink of the sound barrier. The dive goes on, but the nose is coming up. In just seconds, they go from zero-G to double the force of gravity. Captain El Habashi struggles to level the plane and pulls back hard on the control column. The 767's dive begins to slow.
Who would be? You shut off the engine, boy!
In seconds, the engines stop and the power goes off, plunging the aircraft into darkness. Here, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder stop. No one knows what happened in the plane during the next 2 minutes, but radar tracks its path. The plane is climbing again. Up from about 5,000 meters to over 7,500 meters as the aircraft structure is weakened by the stresses of abnormal speeds and maneuvers. Then the aircraft falls into another terrifying dive. Stressed beyond endurance, the left engine is ripped from the plane.
Egypt Air 990, New York Center. Egypt Air 990, if you copy...
At 1:52 a.m., Flight 990 disappears from radar screens, crashing into the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, some 100 kilometers off the American coast. Coast Guard search and rescue get a call at 2:15 a.m. A plane has disappeared, and Coast Guard vessels are called to the scene. The U.S. Merchant Marine training vessel King's Pointer is first to arrive.
We located a significant debris field, and that we have concentrated our search efforts since then on about a 36 square mile of area, about 50 miles south of Nantucket.
At the end of October, the waters of the North Atlantic are so cold that normal life expectancy is about 5 to 6 hours. The investigation develops in 2 directions: fault in the airplane and pilot action. Rumors swirl about what or who may have caused this terrible crash. One of the key questions: why was the relief first officer in the cockpit hours earlier than expected? He was supposed to replace Adel Anwar much later in the flight. When the actions in the cockpit are put together with the voices recorded, a timeline emerges that indicates a series of initially bewildering decisions.
I'll be back to you.
The timeline reveals that after Captain El Habashi leaves the cockpit, there's a series of sounds whose meaning can only be guessed at.
Control it.
And then the relief first officer disconnects the autopilot.
I rely on God.
Released from the autopilot's control, the plane starts to descend, rolling to the left. Egypt's experts described El Batuti's decision to shut off the autopilot as a possible reaction to an unusual movement of the aircraft, prompting him to take manual control. However, the leader of the NTSB investigation disagrees.
We found no reason for the autopilot to be disconnected by a fault or failure in the airplane.
Normally, all aircraft movements are meant to keep passengers comfortable, as though they were on the ground. After switching off the autopilot, El Batuti pushes his control column forward, lowering the elevator panels. So the flight data recorder indicates to the NTSB. Then he pulls the throttles back, reducing engine power. This causes the plane to dive. Egypt's investigators say El Batuti was not trying to crash the plane, and there may have been an elevator failure which he could not overcome. Strangely, there is no discussion of a problem on the cockpit tape. When the captain made his way back to the cockpit, he asked the first officer what was going on and never received a response. As former director of aviation safety, Bernard Loeb oversaw all air crash investigations of the NTSB.
It is well understood that in a cockpit, a jet transport cockpit of virtually any airline in the world, when a captain comes in and asks a question, the first officer will respond. When the captain asked his questions, Batuti did not respond.
Fighting the dive, pulling his column back all the way, the captain cannot gain complete control of the elevator, so he tries the throttles to power out of the dive. He was unaware that seconds earlier the first officer had shut off the fuel to the engines. Egypt's experts say that El Batuti may have been acting out of caution. The flight data show that a low oil pressure warning appeared. That can mean the engines have flamed out. The captain may have then ordered the fuel to the engines shut off as part of the procedure for restarting the engines.
Shut the engines!
It's shut.
The NTSB consider this possible scenario as well. Foremost among the Egyptian investigators' scenarios was a tragic elevator failure. In Washington, at the National Transportation Safety Board, analysis of the flight data recorder indicates that Captain El-Habashi was pulling back on his column to make the plane climb, while First Officer El Batuti appears to be pushing forward on his column, making the plane go down. Elevators work simply. Pull back on the column and the elevators go up, lifting the plane. Push forward and the elevator panels move down to make the plane descend. They work together, but in this case they're going in opposite directions. Egypt's experts argued that this crash could have been caused by a failure in the elevator assembly, producing an elevator hardover, a jam in the elevator controls which lock them in the down position, plunging the aircraft into an uncontrollable dive. They stated that First Officer El Batuti was working to regain control of the elevators and added that he and Captain El-Habashi were working together. If there had been an elevator failure, it could explain the First Officer's unusual performance in the cockpit.
Pull!
Supporting evidence is found when analyzing fragments of the wreckage in the hangar at Rhode Island. Here, investigators made a remarkable discovery: 3 unusually sheared rivets. These tiny parts play an important role in the Boeing 767 elevator assembly. Egypt's consulting experts determined that the scratches in the metal surfaces of these rivets showed that they were sheared off in 2 different directions. One direction could be attributed to the crash. The second could indicate that the break occurred before the crash, and so may have indicated a jam in the elevators. Egypt's experts drew this to the attention of the Federal Aviation Administration, America's civil aviation regulator. Alarmed by the potential risks, the FAA ordered all bell crank rivets to be inspected on every Boeing 767 in operation around the world. The inspections uncovered 136 sheared rivets, and 34 aircraft were grounded until the fault was fixed. The FAA said the problem could result in loss of controllability of the airplane. Egypt's investigators had uncovered a credible-sounding scenario, that the sheared rivets in the elevator assembly of the Boeing 767 indicated a jam that could have caused an elevator hardover that the pilots could not overcome. NTSB investigator Greg Phillips disagreed.
Those are by design for the Boeing 767. The controls can be split. They're designed that way in case one of the surfaces, the control surfaces, fails, so that whoever is still in control of the airplane or can control the airplane with a failed elevator.
Whatever the cause of the dive, Langawisha tries a variety of responses to recover from it.
Finally, they asked me to wait at the extreme 15 seconds. To sit in a 767 or any airplane going out of control and do nothing for 15 seconds. 15 seconds is a long time. It's inconceivable. But I did it. And even at 15 seconds, even waiting 15 seconds, I was able, through no particular skill, really reacting almost as any student pilot would, to recover the airplane, recover from the dive, before the airplane exceeded its limits.
No Boeing 767 has suffered from an elevator hardover and dive before or since the crash. While mechanical failure scenarios were exhausted and terrorism was excluded, the FBI continued to dig into the life of First Officer Gamil El-Batouti. Less than 3 weeks after the disaster, news media report that in the final moments before the crash, El-Batouti said, "I have made my decision. I put my faith in God," causing many to believe he might be an Islamic militant bent on destruction. But the translation was incorrect.
From our initial review of Batouti's background, he was a fairly religious person, but I don't think we had anything to determine that his religious beliefs were radical or beyond what would have been a normal religious person.
What had Batouti said? And what does it mean? Egyptian professor Amin Bonar teaches Arabic at Georgetown University in Washington.
Tawakkaltu means I depend, I rely, I trust, and Allah on, and Allah is God. Oh, tawakkaltu ala Allah, on God I rely, I depend in whatever I'm going to be embarking on. People use it when they start a trip, when they start driving, going back home, you say tawakkaltu ala Allah. When you have an exam, you begin by saying tawakkaltu ala Allah. It's a very positive phrase. So it's not the kind of phrase that anyone would be using before they commit a crime or before they commit suicide.
To say this common phrase once was normal, but El-Batouti repeated it 11 times.
What's happening?
For the El-Batouti family, their grief would be compounded by the need to defend their father's honor.
When he died, the one thing we had to reassure us was that he had died honorably. And now they're trying to take that away from us.
There is a lot of mechanical failures. Why you have only to say that it's a deliberate act, no mechanical, no weather, no mechanical, no weather. So why? Because he's an Egyptian pilot.
Chairman Jim Hall allowed that it could have been a criminal act rather than an accident. The investigation could end up in the hands of the FBI alone. Since the crash, Walid El-Batouti, nephew of Gamil, has become the El-Batouti family spokesman.
You have to understand that the highest ranking in this country which is the Egyptian president, was an Air Force pilot, and he was asked, and he says, according to my experience, it's in the tail unit, something happened there. It's not suicide. It could be either a mechanical failure, a manufacturing failure, something.
In America, the FBI focuses on Gamil el-Batouti and the question of motive. The FBI would learn about the man in control of Egypt Air 990, interviewing colleagues and friends, discovering a dark side to Gamil el-Batouti.
They've used the daughter in the accusation as they said she was sick, and that's why maybe he committed suicide. Before we go to this, I will give you the reason. First, the doctors have already, on that particular flight, have already told them that your daughter is going positive with the medication and everything is going fine, and he was extremely happy. He was so excited to come back.
Gamil el-Batouti was bringing her medical records back that night, among other things.
Okay, he bought tires for his son, and an argument went on the phone between him and his son.
My father called me to come to the airport because he could not carry all 4 tires himself.
He says, listen, I carry your tires all the way from the States. You don't want to come and carry it from the airport? It's a very natural thing. A man is going to commit suicide. Why would he do this?
In New York, the FBI continued their investigation at the Hotel Pennsylvania, where Egypt Air had a block booking of about 50 rooms for their crews.
The investigation that the FBI was able to do as far as Batouti's background probably spanned a period of about a year or so, at least from the records that we were able to obtain and from the interviews we did at the various places that he stayed. So he did have, I think, a propensity to engage in behavior with some of the hotel people in terms of sexual misconduct.
Hey, pretty lady, where did you get to?
Which, you know, at the time really appeared to be totally out of the realm of what was normal for a person of that status to do.
A husband and father of 5, Gamil el-Batouti was notorious for leering at and bothering female guests and hotel staff. The FBI learned that 2 years before the crash, 2 young women reported that he called them on their hotel room phone, telling them to look out the window across the courtyard.
You have a good time too.
When they did, they saw el-Batouti exposing himself and reported the incident to hotel security. His provocative behavior would continue. A hotel maid told the FBI that the night before the crash of Egypt Air 990, el-Batouti had sexually harassed her again.
No, I want to talk to you because, look, I give you $100 if you just come to my room.
I'm not here for that.
Oh, sure.
I'm here to work. Just leave me alone.
Nah, don't be like that.
When the maid reported the approach, another addition was made to the hotel's record of sexual harassment of guests and staff by el-Batouti.
The allegation of the hotel, as far as they said, it happened way before, not one day before the flight. Not one day before the flight, as has been mentioned.
The hotel maid told the FBI the incident took place on October the 29th, 1999, the day before the flight. 3 months after the FBI began investigating el-Batouti, an Egypt Air flight landed in London. The plane's captain requested political asylum in the United Kingdom. He claimed to have information about the cause of the crash of Egypt Air 990, and he feared reprisals in Egypt. Captain Hamdi Taha was a colleague of Gamil el-Batouti, and he was walking away from his wife, his family, and his country. The FBI sent a special agent, and along with a British security officer, he interviewed Captain Taha.
Were you aware of el-Batouti displaying sexually inappropriate behavior?
Yes. This is very important. I heard it from pilots who I trust. Batouti got into trouble for sexual misbehavior in New York with maids and following women and so on. The airline tolerated this for a while, and they told him several times, maybe you can get away with this normally. But this is America. You represent our country. You cannot do these things.
Captain Taha's information was second-hand, but his description of el-Batouti meeting with the airline's chief pilot was intriguing.
Khatem Rushdie went to see Battuti the night they took Flight 990. They had a meeting in the hotel. He told him that what he had done could not be covered up, and something had to be done. The flight back to Cairo from New York would be his last flight.
Camille, we go back many years together. But this will be your last flight to the United States.
He would not be flying to America anymore. Battuti had just had these big privileges taken away from him, and he was humiliated. So, I think that what happened was this. He must have said to himself, if this is going to be my last flight, it will be Hatem Rushdi's last flight also.
Certainly within various corporations where people bring weapons into the office and attempt to take revenge against people that they feel have aggrieved them. Perhaps Battuti felt that Egypt Air had been the cause of some of his issues, and unfortunately in this case it was the kind of office that was flying at 33,000 feet.
The FBI provides Taha's interviews to the NTSB. Egyptian officials asked for another Egypt Air pilot to be interviewed. Mohammed Badrawi had known El Battuti for 40 years. Interviewed at the NTSB, he described discussing with Captain Rushdie what to do about El Battuti's behavior.
Do you know if Hatem Rushdie was aware of the situation with Battuti?
Well, of course he knew. But he pretended not to know, I think, because Hatem Rushdie is the chief pilot.
Badrawi confirms that Hatem Rushdie is upset about El Battuti's harassment of women at the hotel. So Badrawi takes Rushdie's concerns to his old friend.
And if he didn't listen to you, what did you tell him was going to happen?
Nothing much, really. You see, he was on his way out. We don't normally touch people when they're approaching 60.
I know. I'm not saying that you are doing something wrong. They are saying that you're doing something wrong.
I know you are my friend.
We have a little patience, and then they're out.
Badrawi would ask Rushdie to be patient with his old friend, considering that El Battuti only had 3 months to go before retirement.
We've been in the Air Force for 40 years. All he needs is a few more months.
Badrawi's interview confirmed that Rushdie did believe El Battuti's behavior had to be dealt with, and he denied Taha's claim of a meeting between the two on the night of the crash. But Captain Taha was not done. He had another compelling story to add.
When they had done the transcripts of the cockpit voice recorder, the Egypt Air Chief of Operations called all flight crew to a special meeting in Cairo and told us the facts. Just the facts. No commentary. No explanation of any technical problem. He did not say anything, but all we pilots realized that this was not an accident. And then he told us not to talk to anyone about it. Don't talk to your family. Don't talk on the phone. Don't talk to each other, he told us. All of us realized that Battuti had done this on purpose.
For the American families involved, this was a case of 216 murders and 1 suicide. In Egypt, big, close, extended families combine with a strong religious faith to deny that Egyptians commit suicide. Finally, on March the 21st, 2002, after a nearly $10 million investigation over 2 years and 5 months, the NTSB publishes its report and determines that
the probable cause of the Egypt Air Flight 990 accident is the airplane's departure from normal cruise flight and subsequent impact with the Atlantic Ocean as a result of the Relief First Officer's flight control inputs.
The Egyptian Civil Aviation Authority responded angrily, and their response read in part,
"It is obvious that the NTSB has not done the type of professional accident investigation expected by the Egyptian government."
The NTSB's former director of aviation safety takes exception to the Egyptian view.
What was unprofessional was the insistence by the Egyptians in the face of irrefutable evidence to anyone who knows anything about investigating airplane accidents and who knows anything about aerodynamics in airplanes, was the fact that this airplane was intentionally flown into the ocean. No scenario that the Egyptians came up with, or that we came up with, in which there were some sort of mechanical failure in the elevator control system would either match the flight profile or was a situation in which the airplane was not recoverable.
Like many of his countrymen, the loyal nephew cannot believe his uncle Gamil was a mass murderer.
This is a simple plane crash. It was put and made like this for no reason. It shows that it's a cover-up.
Greg Phillips takes pride in having thoroughly investigated every lead and every scenario.
When we sign on to be accident investigators, we do it with the idea that we're going to keep the next one from happening, not to cover up one that did because of whatever reason may be given to us. I've never known that to happen. I've never even known it to come close to happening.
There continue to be differing perspectives on the crash of Egypt Air Flight 990, and unanswered questions remain for broken and damaged families. For many of them, answers to how and why this plane crashed will forever be a painful mystery.